Welcome, dear listener, to the Silent Archives, where forgotten mysteries drift gently through the corridors of time, waiting to be rediscovered in the quiet hours of the night. Tonight, we journey together to the shores of Australia, to a beach where the waves whispered secrets that would echo through decades of wonder and speculation. As you settle into comfort, allowing the tensions of your day to gradually dissolve, know that you are safe here in this space we share. The story I'm about to tell you is one of genuine mystery, a puzzle from our collective past that remains unsolved to this day. Yet in its telling, there is a strange peace, a reminder that not all questions need immediate answers, and that sometimes the most profound mysteries are those that invite us to simply wonder. Take a gentle breath with me now. Feel yourself becoming more comfortable with each passing moment. The world outside can wait. Here, in these archives of sleeping stories, time moves differently. Here, we can explore at our own pace, letting curiosity guide us through the shadows of history. Before we begin our journey to that fateful Australian beach, let's take a few moments to prepare ourselves for the story ahead. Close your eyes if you haven't already, and imagine yourself standing on a quiet shore. The year doesn't matter just yet. Time itself seems to pause here, waiting patiently for you to be ready. Feel the sand beneath your feet, still holding the warmth of a day that has gently faded into evening. The ocean stretches endlessly before you, its rhythm ancient and unchanging. Each wave that reaches the shore carries with it stories from distant places, mysteries from times long past. The sound is hypnotic, eternal, a lullaby that the earth has been singing since the ocean's first form. The texture of the sand beneath your imagined feet changes subtly as we move deeper into our story. Feel how it shifts from the fine, warm grains near the dunes to the cooler, more compact sand where the waves have recently retreated. This is the sand that held the impression of the unknown man's body, the sand that witnessed his final hours in silent patience. Breathe in slowly, matching your breath to the imagined waves. In through your nose, feeling the cool ocean air fill your lungs. Hold for just a moment at the top of your breath, then release gently through your mouth. Like the tide itself, your breathing finds its natural rhythm. In and out. Constant and calm. The beach we're visiting tonight is called Somerton Beach. It lies just southwest of Adelaide, in South Australia. But before we arrive at that specific morning in December 1948, let yourself simply be present with the timeless quality of any beach, anywhere. The salt air carries a peculiar clarity that seems to sharpen our senses, while simultaneously soothing our minds. Picture the horizon where sky meets sea, that infinite line that has captivated humanity since we first stood upright and wondered what lay beyond. It's a boundary that seems definite from a distance, but becomes impossible to reach, always receding as we approach. Much like the mystery we're about to explore, some things are meant to be contemplated rather than conquered. Your body continues to relax, growing heavier and more comfortable with each breath. Any remaining tension in your shoulders melts away like footprints being erased by the incoming tide. Your jaw unclenches, your forehead smooths. You are becoming part of the eternal rhythm of the shore, the endless conversation between land and sea. Now, as we prepare to step into our story, remember that you can drift away at any time. The narrative will continue. My voice, a gentle current that can carry you into sleep whenever you're ready. There's no need to remember every detail, no test at the end. Simply let the story wash over you like those patient waves, taking from it whatever feels right for you tonight. On the first day of December 1948, summer was just beginning to warm the shores of South Australia. The Second World War had ended 3 years earlier, and the world was slowly learning how to breathe again, how to trust in ordinary mornings and unremarkable days. Adelaide, the coastal capital of South Australia, was a city finding its rhythm in peacetime, its citizens returning to the gentle pursuits of normal life. In Adelaide, the summer of 1948 carried with it the particular quality of post-war optimism mixed with uncertainty. The city itself was growing, changing, finding its identity in a world that was simultaneously more connected and more divided than ever before. The beaches were places of refuge, where people came to escape not just the heat, but the weight of recent history, the memories of rationing and blackouts, and the constant fear that had defined the war years. Somerton Beach, also known as Somerton Park Beach, was a popular destination for those seeking respite from the warming weather. The beach stretches along the Gulf St. Vincent, its sand fine and golden, its waters generally calm and inviting. The suburb of Glenelg lies nearby, with its shops and hotels, its jetty extending into the sea like a finger pointing toward the horizon. Somerton Beach, with its gentle curve and protective seawall, had always been a place where time seemed to move differently. Local residents would often speak of its peculiar quality of peace, how, even on busy summer days, there remained pockets of absolute tranquility. The unknown man seemed to have found one of these pockets, or perhaps created one simply by his presence. It was here, on this seemingly ordinary morning, that John Lyons and two companions decided to take a ride along the beach. John was a jockey, accustomed to early mornings and the feeling of movement beneath him, though on this day he rode not a thoroughbred, but simply enjoyed the freedom of the coastal path. The sun was already climbing, promising another warm December day. The beach was quiet, peaceful, with only the occasional early morning walker or swimmer disturbing the pristine sand. The morning light on December 1st would have painted everything in soft pastels. The seawall, that low barrier between civilization and the eternal ocean, caught the early rays and held them, warming the stone that would provide the man's final resting place. This wall had seen countless sunrises, had supported the weight of countless contemplative figures watching the horizon, but none quite like this. As they made their way along the shore, something caught their attention. Near the crippled children's home, a figure was visible against the seawall. This wasn't unusual in itself. People often rested against the wall, watching the sea or simply enjoying the morning air. But something about the stillness of this figure, the absolute motionlessness, made them pause. The man was well dressed, remarkably so for someone who appeared to have spent the night on the beach. He wore a brown suit of good quality, a white shirt with a red and blue tie, brown shoes polished to a shine that seemed incongruous with his location. He was positioned with his head resting against the sea wall, his legs extended straight out in front of him, crossed at the ankles. A half-smoked cigarette rested on his right collar, as if it had fallen from his lips mid-smoke. At first glance, one might assume he had simply dozed off while enjoying an early morning cigarette, watching the sunrise paint the waters of the Gulf in shades of gold and pink. But as John Lyons and his companions drew closer, the unnatural stillness became more apparent. The man's chest didn't rise and fall with breath. His skin held a waxy pallor that spoke of something more permanent than sleep. The police were summoned, and Constable John Moss was among the first officials to arrive at the scene. What he found would become one of Australia's most enduring mysteries, a puzzle that would draw in investigators, code breakers, and amateur sleuths from around the world for decades to come. The man appeared to be somewhere between 40 and 50 years of age, though death has a way of making such estimates uncertain. He was in excellent physical condition, with the broad shoulders and muscled calves that suggested an active life. His hands were soft, uncalloused, indicating he wasn't engaged in manual labor. His fingernails were clean and carefully maintained. Everything about his appearance suggested a man of means, someone who took care with his presentation. Yet when Constable Moss began his initial investigation, the mysteries only deepened. The man carried no identification, no wallet, no papers, no cards bearing his name. His pockets yielded only the most ordinary of items: an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a packet of chewing gum, a box of matches, 2 combs, and a pack of cigarettes. But even these mundane objects held their own puzzles. The cigarettes were of a different brand than the one found near his collar, suggesting either a recent change of preference or that someone else had been with him. More peculiar still were the absence of certain things. All the labels had been carefully removed from his clothing, not torn away in haste, but meticulously cut out or unpicked, leaving no trace of manufacturer or origin. His dental work, examined later, didn't match the typical patterns used by Australian dentists, suggesting he might have come from overseas. Yet, he carried no passport, no travel documents of any kind. The Somerton Beach mystery had begun, though none present that morning could have imagined how deep it would run, how many lives it would touch, or how many questions it would leave unanswered even decades later. The body was taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, where Dr. John Bennett conducted the initial examination. What he found only added layers to the mystery. The man had died sometime during the night or very early morning hours. There were no obvious signs of violence, no wounds or bruising that might explain his death. His internal organs showed no clear signs of poisoning, though Dr. Bennett noted that certain poisons leave no trace and couldn't be ruled out entirely. The man's physical characteristics were documented with the careful precision that marked post-war police work. Height, 5 feet 11 inches. Hair, fair to ginger-colored, with a slight wave, graying at the temples in that distinguished way that comes to some men in middle age. Eyes, gray. Build, athletic, with particularly well-developed calf muscles that suggested either a dancer or someone who spent considerable time walking or climbing. His teeth became a particular point of interest. 18 teeth were missing, and those that remained showed unusual wear patterns. The dental work itself was of high quality but didn't match Australian standards of the time. Some investigators would later suggest this pointed to American origins, while others argued for Eastern European techniques. Like everything else about the man, his teeth offered clues that led in multiple directions, but no definitive answers. The coroner's inquest began on the 17th of December 1948, presided over by Thomas Erskine Cleland. The proceedings would stretch on for months, with adjournments and recalls as new evidence emerged. The cause of death remained frustratingly elusive. The man's last meal had been a pasty, consumed perhaps 3 or 4 hours before death. There was blood mixed with the food in his stomach, suggesting some form of internal distress, but not enough to indicate a cause of death. Various theories were proposed. Poison remained a strong possibility, with digitalis and strophanthine mentioned as substances that could cause death while leaving little trace. Both were heart medications that, in sufficient doses, could be lethal. The man's peculiar position when found, with legs extended and crossed, suggested he hadn't simply collapsed but had arranged himself deliberately, perhaps as the poison took effect. But who was he? This question consumed investigators. His fingerprints were taken and circulated throughout Australia and to international police agencies. No matches were found. His photograph was published in newspapers across the country and beyond. No one came forward to identify him. Appeals were made for anyone who might have seen him on November 30th or in the early hours of December 1st. A few witnesses emerged with fragmentary sightings. One witness, Olive Neal, recalled seeing a man matching the description lying on the beach the evening before, around 7 p.m. Another couple reported seeing him around 7:30 p.m., noting that he had moved his position slightly but seemed merely to be resting and watching the sunset. They thought nothing of it at the time. People often came to the beach in the evening to enjoy the cooler air and the view. As December turned to January, the investigation seemed stalled. The man's body remained in the morgue, unclaimed and unidentified. It was then, on the 14th of January 1949, that the first major breakthrough occurred, though it would prove to be less a solution than a deepening of the mystery. Detective Sergeant Lionel Lean had been assigned to re-examine the dead man's clothing. Perhaps earlier investigators had missed something, some small clue that might unlock the mystery. He worked methodically through each garment, checking seams and linings with the patience of someone who understood that in mystery, the smallest details often prove most significant. As we drift deeper into the mystery, allow your mind to wander along the shoreline of possibility. The investigation that followed the discovery would sprawl across months and years. But here, in our story, time moves at the pace of your breathing, at the rhythm of waves that care nothing for human urgency or the need for answers. It was in the fob pocket of the man's trousers that Lean made his discovery. This tiny pocket, designed originally for pocket watches and often overlooked in modern clothing, had been missed in the initial examination. Inside, carefully rolled and tucked away, was a small piece of paper, no bigger than a bus ticket. On this scrap of paper were printed 2 words, Tamam Shud. The detectives who worked the case often spoke later of its haunting quality. How it seemed to resist solution, not through lack of evidence, but through an abundance of clues that led in every direction except toward truth. Each thread they followed seemed to split into multiple paths, each path opening onto new questions rather than answers. The words meant nothing to the investigators initially. They appeared to be foreign, but what language? Expert after expert was consulted. Finally, the words were identified as Persian, meaning ended or finished. More specifically, they appeared to be from a poem, likely from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poetry that had gained significant popularity in English translation. Detective Sergeant Lean, the man who discovered the Tamam Shud paper, would later describe the moment of finding it as almost mystical. The tiny pocket had been overlooked not once, but several times. It was as if the clue had revealed itself only when the time was right, only when the investigators were prepared to discover something that would deepen rather than solve the mystery. The Rubaiyat, particularly in the translation by Edward Fitzgerald, had become something of a cultural phenomenon in the English-speaking world. Its themes of living for the moment, accepting the transience of life, and finding meaning in the face of mortality resonated strongly in the post-war period. Many editions had been printed, often as small, portable books that soldiers had carried during the war. The paper itself, that fragment torn from the Rubaiyat, seemed to pulse with significance. Those 2 Persian words meaning ended or finished carried the weight of prophecy. In the context of Khayyam's poetry, they represented acceptance of mortality, the peaceful recognition that all things pass. But in the context of the mystery, they became something more complex, more troubling. But why would a man carry just these 2 words, torn from what appeared to be a book? The paper itself was unusual, too thin and fine to be from a common paperback. Detective Sergeant Lean and his team began a search for the book from which this scrap had been torn. They visited libraries and bookshops, compared different editions, searching for one that matched the unusual paper and printing of the discovered fragment. Months passed without success. The man, now known in the press as the Somerton Man, or the Unknown Man, had been buried in June 1949 inches, the West Terrace Cemetery in Adelaide. His grave marked only with a number, 90. Still, the investigation continued, driven by a combination of professional duty and the compelling nature of the mystery itself. Then, in July 1949, an extraordinary development occurred. A man came forward with a copy of the Rubaiyat that he had found in his car. He wished to remain anonymous, identified in records only as Ronald Francis or sometimes Mr. Francis, though this was likely not his real name. His story was remarkable and, like everything else in this case, raised as many questions as it answered. Consider the book from which this fragment was torn, lying in the anonymous car for months before being discovered. The stranger who found it there and kept it all that time before coming forward. Even this witness seemed touched by the mystery's peculiar quality of partial revelation. He gave only his first name, or perhaps a false name, and then disappeared back into anonymity almost as completely as the dead man himself. According to this witness, on the night of the 30th of November 1948, or possibly in the early morning of December 1st, he had parked his car near Somerton Beach. He had left the windows down, as was common in the warm weather. When he returned to his car later, he found a book on the floor of the back seat. Thinking little of it at the time, he had tossed it into the glove compartment and forgotten about it. It was only months later, when his brother-in-law mentioned the mysterious Tamam Shud case being discussed in the newspapers, that he retrieved the book and examined it. The final page had been torn out. And when investigators compared the scrap found in the dead man's pocket with the book, it was a perfect match. The paper, the printing, even the microscopic fibers aligned exactly. The discovery of the Rubaiyat opened new avenues of investigation, but also deepened the mystery considerably. The book itself contained handwritten markings that defied explanation. On the back cover, someone had written what appeared to be a code or cipher in pencil. W.R. Goababd, Mliawi, W.T. Bimpenet, Mliaboya, Ko-si, Iti-MT, MT, MT, MT. The code, those 5 lines of seemingly random letters, attracted attention from cryptographers around the world precisely because it felt so tantalizingly close to meaning. Unlike truly random letter sequences, it possessed an almost musical quality, a rhythm that suggested intentionality without revealing purpose. Some who studied it reported feeling as if they were on the verge of understanding, as if the meaning hovered just beyond the edge of consciousness. These 5 lines of letters meant nothing obvious. Were they a code, a cipher, random letters? Cryptographers from various agencies, including military intelligence, attempted to decode the message. Some thought they detected patterns suggesting it might be initial letters of words in a sentence or poem. Others proposed more complex cipher systems. But no definitive solution emerged. There was also a phone number written in the book, X3000, 239. This local Adelaide number was traced to a young nurse named Jessica Thompson, though she would later be identified in some accounts as Jo Thompson, or by other variations. When police interviewed her, her reaction was striking and has become one of the most discussed aspects of the case. Upon being shown a plaster cast bust of the dead man's face and upper torso, which had been created before his burial, Thompson reportedly nearly fainted. Her face drained of color, and she seemed deeply distressed. Yet when questioned, she claimed not to know the man. She could offer no explanation for why her phone number appeared in his book. Though she admitted to having given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man named Alfred Boxall during the war years when she had worked at the Royal North Shore Hospital in Sydney, Jessica Thompson's reaction to seeing the plaster bust remains one of the case's most emotionally charged moments. Witnesses described her response as visceral, immediate, the kind of recognition that bypasses conscious thought. Yet her subsequent denial created a contradiction that seemed to embody the entire mystery. Clear evidence of knowledge, combined with absolute refusal to acknowledge that knowledge. This seemed like a crucial lead. Could the dead man be Alfred Boxall? The theory made sense. A wartime romance. A gift of poetry. A man traveling to see a former love. Perhaps carrying poison in case of rejection. It was a narrative that fit the romantic and tragic themes of the Rubaiyat itself. But when investigators tracked down Alfred Boxall, they found him very much alive and living in Sydney. Moreover, he still had his copy of the Rubaiyat, intact with all pages present. The connection to Thompson remained unexplained, another thread that led nowhere definitive. Thompson's behavior during the investigation puzzled many. She seemed to know more than she was saying, yet she maintained her story of not recognizing the man. Years later, her daughter would claim that her mother had indeed known the dead man's identity, but had chosen to keep silent, taking the secret to her grave. Whether this was truth or family mythology remains unknown. The nurse lived in Mosley Street, Glenelg, just a short distance from where the body was found. The proximity seemed too coincidental to ignore. Had the man come to see her? Was he watching her house from the beach? Or was the connection more indirect? The phone number obtained second or third hand, as 1,949 turned to 1,950. And the years began to accumulate. The Somerton Beach case passed from active investigation into the realm of enduring mystery. Yet interest in the case never truly died. If anything, the passage of time only added to its mystique. Theories proliferated, each attempting to explain the inexplicable, to provide a narrative that could encompass all the strange facts and circumstances. The years that followed saw the case transform from investigation to folklore, from police work to cultural phenomenon. Each decade brought new theories, new technologies, new hopes for solution. But perhaps the mystery's greatest achievement was not in resisting these attempts at resolution, but in continuing to inspire them. The unknown man became a catalyst for human curiosity. A blank canvas onto which each generation could project its own anxieties and obsessions. The Cold War context of 1948 provided fertile ground for espionage theories. This was the early stages of the nuclear age, a time of tremendous international tension. Australia, with its uranium deposits and strategic Pacific location, was of interest to various intelligence services. Could the Somerton Man have been a spy? The careful removal of clothing labels, the apparent use of a cipher, the lack of identification, all seemed to support this theory. Some researchers pointed to the Venona project, the American effort to decrypt Soviet intelligence communications, which was active during this period. Others noted that the British had been developing weapons testing facilities in Australia. The proximity of Adelaide to Woomera, where rocket and weapons testing would soon begin, seemed significant to those pursuing the espionage angle. The peculiar physical condition of the man's body also fueled speculation. Those overdeveloped calf muscles were particularly intriguing. Ballet dancers developed such muscles, leading some to wonder if he might have been a performer. Others suggested he might have been a steeplejack or someone else whose profession required extensive climbing. One theory proposed he was a third officer on a merchant ship, used to climbing between decks. The romantic tragedy theory remained popular, especially given the connection to the Rubaiyat and its themes of love, loss, and the acceptance of fate. Perhaps he was a jilted lover who had taken his own life after a final rejection. The peaceful position of his body, the careful arrangement of his limbs, suggested someone who had chosen their end deliberately. But poison suicides typically involve some evidence of the poison's container. No bottle, vial, or packet was found near the body or anywhere on the beach. If he had taken poison elsewhere and come to the beach to die, why choose this particular spot? And why carry that mysterious scrap of paper? Some investigators began to explore the possibility that the man had died elsewhere and been placed on the beach. This would explain the absence of vomit or other signs of distress that might accompany poisoning. It might also explain the curious position of the body and the absence of any witness who saw him arrive at the beach. Despite several people noticing him once he was there, medical professionals continued to debate the cause of death. Digitalis poisoning remained a favored theory, as it could cause death while leaving minimal trace. Some suggested rare poisons like tetrodotoxin or saxitoxin. Others wondered if he might have suffered from a rare genetic condition that caused sudden death, though this wouldn't explain the blood in his stomach. In January 1949, while the investigation was still in its early stages, detectives made another significant discovery. Staff at the Adelaide railway station cloakroom reported an unclaimed suitcase that had been deposited on the 30th of November 1948, the day before the body was discovered. Could this belong to the mysterious man on the beach? The suitcase was brown, of good quality but not exceptional. It bore no identifying marks or labels that might indicate its owner. Inside, investigators found clothing and personal items that seemed to whisper of journeys taken and destinations unknown. A red checked dressing gown that spoke of quiet mornings in unfamiliar rooms. Slippers worn smooth by countless steps across hotel floors. Pajamas, shaving materials, and underwear, the intimate artifacts of a traveling life. Like the clothes on the body, most labels had been carefully removed. However, investigators found 3 items that bore markings: a tie with the name T. Keane, a laundry bag with the name Keane, and a singlet with the name Kean, without the A. This seemed like a crucial breakthrough. Finally, a name. But extensive searches found no missing person named T. Keane, or any similar variation. The suitcase also revealed more intriguing elements. An electrician's screwdriver, practical and well used. A table knife that had been carefully sharpened to an almost surgical edge, its purpose unknown. a stenciling brush of the type used for marking cargo on merchant ships, suggesting maritime connections or perhaps more clandestine communications. Most intriguing was a quantity of orange thread that matched thread used to repair a pocket in the trousers the man was wearing when found. This specialized thread, uncommon in Australia, hinted at repairs made far from home, in workshops across distant seas. The presence of the suitcase raised new questions about the man's movements. If he had arrived in Adelaide by train and deposited the suitcase, why not check into a hotel? Why spend the night on the beach? The unused train ticket to Henley Beach found in his pocket suggested he had planned to travel there but changed his mind or was prevented from doing so. The combination of the suitcase's contents and the items on the body painted a picture of a man prepared for travel, someone accustomed to moving from place to place. The quality of his possessions suggested middle-class means, not wealth but comfortable. Yet the careful removal of identifying marks spoke to a deliberate desire for anonymity, or perhaps a professional need for it. As news of the Somerton Beach mystery spread beyond Australia, international interest grew. The case captured imaginations around the world, perhaps because it seemed to embody the uncertainties and paranoia of the early Cold War period. In an age when national borders were solidifying and identification documents becoming standardized, here was a man who had somehow slipped through all the systems designed to track and identify individuals. Interpol circulated the man's fingerprints and photograph to member nations. Police forces from London to Los Angeles, from Singapore to Stockholm, checked their records. Missing person reports from around the world were compared against the Somerton Man's description. Ships' manifests were reviewed to see if any passenger had disembarked in Australia and subsequently disappeared. The investigation revealed how difficult it was, even in 1948, to simply vanish. Most people left traces. Family who missed them. Employers who noted their absence. Landladies who wondered about unpaid rent. The complete absence of anyone coming forward to claim or identify the Somerton Man suggested either that he was from somewhere very far away, where news of the case hadn't penetrated, or that those who knew him had reasons to stay silent. Some investigators began exploring the possibility that the man was a refugee or displaced person from the war. Millions of people had been uprooted by World War II, their documentation lost or destroyed. Australia had begun accepting large numbers of European migrants and refugees. Could the Somerton Man have been one of these displaced persons, perhaps travelling under false papers that he had destroyed before his death? The quality of his dental work continued to intrigue investigators. Consultations with international dental associations suggested techniques that were more common in America or certain parts of Europe than in Australia. But without more specific markers, it was impossible to narrow down his origin definitively. One theory that gained some credence was that the letters might represent initial letters of words in a poem or song, possibly even verses from the Rubaiyat itself. But attempts to match the pattern to known texts proved fruitless. If it was a private mnemonic, its meaning might have died with its creator. As the 1,950 seconds progressed, the Somerton Beach case gradually shifted from active investigation to cold case status. The file remained open, and occasionally new information would emerge that briefly rekindled official interest, but the trail had grown cold. The Somerton Man lay in his unmarked grave, his secrets buried with him, yet the mystery refused to fade from public consciousness. It became part of Australian folklore, a story told and retold, each telling adding new speculation or emphasizing different aspects. The case appeared in books about unsolved mysteries, in true crime compilations, in discussions of famous codes and ciphers. Jessica Thompson, the nurse whose phone number had appeared in the Rubaiyat, continued living in Adelaide. She married and raised a family, maintaining her silence about any connection to the dead man. Occasionally, journalists or amateur investigators would approach her, but she revealed nothing new. Her reticence only added to the speculation. What did she know? In the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, new technologies offered hope that the mystery might finally be solved. Advances in forensic science, in chemical analysis, in photographic enhancement, were applied to the existing evidence. The photograph of the code was examined with new techniques, hoping to reveal previously invisible details. The plaster bust of the man's face was studied using anthropological methods that might indicate ethnic origin, but each new technique seemed only to confirm what was already known, without adding the crucial piece that would solve the puzzle. The man remained stubbornly anonymous. His code, if it was a code, unbroken. His purpose in coming to Somerton Beach unknown. The Cold War context continued to influence interpretations of the case. As more information about espionage activities of the period was declassified, researchers looked for connections. The Cambridge 5 scandal, the Petrov affair, various intelligence operations in the Pacific region, all were examined for possible links to the Somerton Man. Some researchers noted that 1948 was a crucial year in the development of the Australian intelligence services. The Australian Security Intelligence Organisation, ASIO, would be formed in 1949, partly in response to concerns about Soviet espionage. Could the Somerton Man have been connected to the intelligence activities that led to ASIO's formation? Others pointed to the Woomera rocket range, which was being developed around this time as part of the Anglo-Australian weapons testing program. The facility would become crucial for missile and atomic weapons testing. Had the Somerton Man been trying to gather information about these developments? But for every theory that suggested espionage, there were equally compelling arguments against it. Would a professional spy carry an obvious code in a poetry book? Would they leave any traces at all if they planned to disappear? The mixture of careful anonymity, removed labels, and careless clues, the phone number, the code, seemed to argue against professional intelligence work. The advent of the Internet age brought new life to the Somerton Beach mystery. Online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries attracted a global community of amateur investigators. Documents and photographs from the original investigation were digitized and shared, allowing people from around the world to examine the evidence. This crowdsourcing of investigation led to some interesting developments. Genealogists began tracing possible family connections, looking for men who had disappeared around 1948 who might match the Somerton Man's description. Military historians searched archives for records of servicemen who had gone missing. Maritime researchers examined crew lists from ships that had docked in Adelaide. In 2009, a team from the University of Adelaide began a serious scientific investigation of the case. They obtained permission to examine the plaster bust and hair samples that had been preserved. Using modern DNA techniques, they hoped to create a genetic profile that might be matched against databases or potential relatives. The investigation revealed some intriguing details. Analysis of the hair suggested the man had been exposed to certain metals in higher than normal concentrations. This might indicate industrial work, or perhaps exposure to certain types of weapons or equipment. But without more context, it was impossible to draw definitive conclusions. Facial recognition technology was applied to the photographs and bust, comparing them to databases of missing persons and unidentified bodies from around the world. Several potential matches were investigated, but none proved conclusive. The passage of time had degraded the usefulness of photographic comparison, and the plaster bust, while detailed, was still an interpretation rather than a perfect representation. Computer analysis was applied to the mysterious code, looking for patterns that might have been invisible to human perception. Some claimed to have found hidden messages, but none achieved widespread acceptance. The possibility that the letters were truly random, perhaps the product of a dying man's confused thoughts, could never be entirely dismissed. In 2011, Adelaide researcher Derek Abbott claimed to have made a breakthrough. Through extensive genealogical research and DNA analysis, he proposed that the Somerton Man might have been connected to Jessica Thompson's family through an illegitimate child. This theory suggested a more personal motive for the man's presence on the beach and his possession of her phone number. But this theory, like all others, remained unproven. DNA evidence was degraded and inconclusive. Family members who might have provided answers were long dead. The trail of evidence, never strong to begin with, had grown fainter with each passing decade. Today, More than 70 years after that December morning in 1948, the Somerton Beach mystery remains unsolved. The unknown man has become a cipher himself, a blank space onto which we project our theories, our fears, our fascination with the unknowable. What draws us so powerfully to this mystery? Perhaps it's the very completeness of the anonymity. In our interconnected world, where digital footprints follow us everywhere, where privacy seems an increasingly rare commodity, the idea of someone completely unknown exercises a peculiar fascination. The Somerton Man achieved, whether by design or accident, what seems impossible. He became nobody. Or perhaps it's the romantic elements of the story that capture us. The poetry book, the possible unrequited love, the death on a beach. As dawn approached, these elements seem lifted from literature rather than life, giving the case a mythic quality that transcends its historical specifics. The various theories about the Somerton Man's identity reflect the preoccupations of their times. In the 1,940 seconds and 1,950 seconds, he was a possible spy, a player in the grand game of nations. In the 1,960 seconds and 1,970 seconds, he became a figure of existential mystery, a man who chose to erase himself. In our current age, he's the subject of genetic genealogy, his DNA holding secrets that technology might one day unlock. Each generation has brought its own tools and perspectives to the case, yet the mystery endures. The code, if it is a code, remains unbroken. The man's identity remains unknown. His purpose in being on Somerton Beach that night remains a matter of speculation. Some cases are solved decades after they occur, when a deathbed confession reveals the truth, or when new evidence emerges from an unexpected source. The Somerton Beach case might yet be solved. Someone might recognize a detail that connects to a family story. A document might surface that provides the missing link. Technology might advance to the point where degraded DNA can reveal what it currently conceals. But there's also the possibility that this mystery will never be solved, that the Somerton Man will remain forever unknown. In a way, this outcome has its own poetic justice. The man who carried the words "ended" or "finished" in his pocket has become a story without an ending, a narrative that continues to evolve with each new theory, each new investigation. The beach itself remained largely unchanged through all of this. The tides continued their ancient rhythm, caring nothing for human mysteries. The seawall stood patient and solid, warming in the sun, cooling in the night breeze. Sometimes people would come specifically to see where the body had been found, but more often, the beach simply provided its timeless service as a place of contemplation and peace. The beach where he died looks much the same today as it did in 1948. The waves still roll in from the Gulf St. Vincent, endless and patient. People still walk along the sand, perhaps passing the spot where the unknown man spent his last hours, without knowing its significance. The physical traces of the mystery have largely vanished, but the questions remain, as persistent as the tide. As we near the end of our journey through the Somerton Beach Enigma, it's worth reflecting on why unsolved mysteries provide such strange comfort, especially in the quiet hours when sleep beckons. There's something profoundly human about our relationship with the unknown, our ability to find peace in questions that have no answers. The Somerton Man's story reminds us that not everything in life needs to be resolved, categorized, and filed away. Some things can simply be wondered about, contemplated without the pressure of finding solutions. In our daily lives, we're constantly solving problems, answering questions, making decisions. But here, in this space of mystery, we can simply exist with the unknown. Think of how many small mysteries populate our own lives. The stranger whose eyes met ours meaningfully on a train, then disappeared into the crowd. The letter that arrived with no return address. The object found in an old coat pocket that we can't remember acquiring. These small mysteries add texture to our existence, reminders that life is larger and stranger than our daily routines might suggest. The Somerton Beach mystery has now become part of your story too. a narrative you carry with you into sleep. Perhaps tonight you'll dream of Australian beaches, of coded messages, of a man who chose to become nobody, and in doing so, became everybody's mystery. These dreams, should they come, are gifts from your sleeping mind, weaving new patterns from old threads, creating your own interpretations of this endless story. Consider how the Somerton Man's final night might have unfolded. Did he watch the sun set over the gulf, knowing it would be his last sunset? Did he think of distant places, of people he'd never see again? Or was his mind already fading, the poison perhaps beginning its work, making his thoughts drift like clouds across the darkening sky? We'll never know his final thoughts, just as we'll never fully know the final thoughts of anyone, even those closest to us. We are all, in the end, mysteries to one another, carrying our secret codes, our hidden pockets of meaning that others can only guess at. The Somerton Man simply made this universal truth visible, tangible, undeniable. The nurse, Jessica Thompson, carried her own mysteries to the grave. Her daughter later said that her mother had known the man's identity, but had chosen silence for reasons that seemed good to her. What loyalties, what fears, what promises might have bound her to that silence? We judge her reticence from our safe distance. But who among us doesn't have things we would take to our graves? Truths that seem too large or too dangerous, or simply too personal to share. Even the code, those 5 lines of letters that have frustrated so many brilliant minds, might have been something utterly mundane. Perhaps they were initial letters of a shopping list in a foreign language. Perhaps they were a child's game. Meaningless marks made while thinking of something else entirely. Or perhaps they were indeed a message of tremendous importance, one that changed the course of someone's life, even if we'll never know whose or how. This is the dual nature of mystery. It can be both profound and mundane simultaneously. The Somerton Man might have been a spy carrying secrets that could have altered history, or he might have been a traveling salesman who made an unfortunate decision to take his own life far from home. Both possibilities exist in permanent superposition, neither provable nor disprovable. And now, dear listener, as our story draws to its close, or rather to its deliberate lack of closure, let yourself sink deeper into the comfort of your rest. The waves of Somerton Beach continue their eternal conversation with the shore, just as they did on that December morning in 1948. Just as they're doing right now, at this very moment, on the other side of the world. Your breathing has perhaps found its own rhythm now, as steady and reliable as those distant waves, in and out, a pattern as old as life itself, yet unique to you in this moment. You don't need to solve any mysteries tonight. You don't need to decode any messages or uncover any identities. You can simply be. Simply rest. Simply allow the story to settle into your consciousness, like sand settling after a wave retreats. The Somerton Man, whoever he was, has become immortal in his anonymity. Every time his story is told, he lives again, walking that beach, carrying his secret words, approaching his chosen or fated end. He has become part of the great tapestry of human mystery, a thread that connects us all in our shared fascination with the unknown. Perhaps tomorrow, or next week, or years from now, you'll find yourself on a beach somewhere, and you'll remember this story. You'll look at the strangers passing by and wonder what mysteries they carry. You'll feel the sand beneath your feet and think of footprints that vanish with the tide, of stories that end mid-sentence, of codes that refuse to yield their meanings. But for now, there's nothing you need to do except rest. Let the mystery be a mystery. Let the unknown remain unknown. There's a strange peace in accepting that some questions don't have answers, or at least not answers we're meant to find. The Somerton Man kept his secrets, and in keeping them, gave us something perhaps more valuable. An endless story, a permanent wondering, a reminder that life is larger and stranger than we often remember. Sleep well, knowing that some mysteries are gifts rather than problems to be solved. As you drift toward sleep, or deeper into sleep if you're already there, Know that you're part of this continuing story now. Everyone who hears about the Somerton Beach mystery becomes a keeper of it, a guardian of its questions. You might dream of it, or you might not. You might wake tomorrow with a sudden insight about the code, or you might forget the details entirely, leaving only a vague impression of beaches and mysteries and the comfort of unsolved puzzles. The archives are closing now, but they never truly close. They're always here, waiting, patient as libraries in the small hours of the morning, ready whenever you need to return. There are other stories waiting in these archives, other mysteries to explore, other journeys to take when you're ready. But for tonight, this story is complete in its incompleteness, finished in its unfinishedness. The man on Somerton Beach has finally found his peace, whatever that peace might be, and now you too can find yours. Let the last words echo gently. Tamam Shud. It is ended, or it is finished. Or perhaps, in the way of all good mysteries, it has just begun. Sleep well, dear listener, dream deeply, and remember, in the words of the Rubaiyat that started this all, the moving finger writes, and having writ, moves on. Tonight, the finger has written this story into your consciousness. Tomorrow, it will move on to write new stories, new mysteries, new wonders. The Silent Archives thanks you for joining us tonight. Until we meet again in that quiet space between waking and sleeping, between known and unknown, between question and answer, rest peacefully. The mysteries will still be here when you return. They always are. Tamam Shud.